Wake up YPN in the morning, people. We got an awesome guest here today that I will introduce. Heather's going to do our green sheet, and of course, as always, we got Josh doing the quote for us. But I'm very excited to talk to Baro today. And Baro, if you don't know, has been a realtor since 1992, starting in property management, and then eventually starting his own real estate company, Shalizi Real Estate. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then certified to teach a number of NAR classes, as well as the NMREC classes, president of RANUM at some point in 2015, and the chair of the global NAR board, is that right?
Committee.
Sorry, the chair of the committee, and a liaison to India and Bulgaria, and was also Realtor of the Year. And we are going to talk about a bunch of the liaison global stuff today, because that's sort of our theme for our podcast for the day.
Yeah, global
I'm
real
looking
estate.
forward to it.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, welcome, Baro.
Thank you.
All right, what do you want to roll into first?
Do green sheet
Yeah,
real quick?
let's get the
Well.
green sheet done. So we're definitely seeing a slowdown in things this month, you know.
Say it isn't so.
Interest rates are rising and our sales are, buyers are actually having a chance at things. Looking over our stats for July and June, we're actually down in our average sales price by over $10,000.
Thank God.
Yeah,
I
back
keep
in
hoping that median price just keeps going down. I want like first-time home buyers to have a better shot.
Oh, I know,
Yes.
I know. Back in June, it was $383,000 as our average sales price, and we're down to $379,000, so not over $10,000, but about $5,000. So that's still a big jump.
Well, I think we're seeing a slowdown all over the place.
Mhm.
In the rental market, this time of the year is usually my biggest time. Everybody's going back to school.
Right.
And it's like rent. And this is when everybody's switching over. People aren't moving. People aren't like this is kind of a very interesting year right now.
Do you feel that they're not moving because they think rents are still high and so they don't want to move?
I think that's exactly the problem. I think what's going on is if they have something that they marginally like
Mhm.
and the rent is affordable, they are afraid of moving into something where the rent's going to be more and
Right.
maybe not even as nice,
Mhm.
which is
What we're seeing.
absolutely a real scenario right now. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
Absolutely.
think that kind of scares. It's almost
That's
a
a
scare.
scary
Yeah.
thought, to not be able to afford your living expenses.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've got new listings at almost 1,300, so that's good. We've got new things coming on, and there's an inventory of homes of just under that at 1,261. We've got pending sales of just over 1,000, and our closed sales are just under 1,000. So, things are still moving along, but I definitely have seen lots of price reductions. I check the MLS hot sheet every morning, and there's always price reductions now, which is good to see. I mean, yeah, I want sellers to get the biggest bang for their buck, or get the biggest profit back, but like Josh said, we want buyers to be able to.
So let me ask you on that. Do you feel the price reductions are because the market is coming down, or because it's leveling, but sellers are still thinking it's going up, so they're pricing higher than they should?
It could go either way. Personally, I think that sellers are pricing high and realizing that, buyers are not even being able to afford
Right,
that now
right.
with the rise of interest rates. So they're having
Okay.
to bring their sales prices down to a more affordable rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg scenario, huh?
Mhm.
Yes.
It's a real interesting situation we're in right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm seeing the same thing happening in Santa Fe, and so
Yeah.
I'm always curious as to what is the motivating factor? Is it that prices are coming down, or that the market has leveled, but the sellers haven't caught on to that?
I think next month we'll see sellers catching on
Mhm, mhm.
a lot more.
More, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and you can also deep dive into these stats. It's all on gar.com.
Yep.
There's graphs. There's all kinds of statistics if you're really interested in
Yeah.
what is happening from month to month or from year to year.
Which is really good to be able to show your sellers when they
Mhm.
want to price high, but you can show them the statistics of this is why we shouldn't price quite there. So if you guys are interested in looking at those stats ever, they are at car.com.
Yep. All right, so we're talking about global real estate. I started looking up global I got into philosophy. I deep dive into these. I'm looking for my quotes all the time. Sometimes I can really go on tangents. And so I went through a number of different topics. I ended up with more of a one world philosophy kind of thing. And I found a quote by Frank Sinatra, who was a hero of mine. You know, I figure if you're the chairman of the board, you're pretty. Awesome, right? If you don't know the guy on the other side of the world, love him anyway, because he's just like you. He has the same dreams, the same hopes and fears, and it's one world, pal. We're all neighbors.
I like that one.
Yeah.
And so true.
And I got to say pal. So,
Personally, I thought you were just on a Chicago kick after the conference.
how can I not? I definitely
That
still.
absolutely relates, and I very much appreciate how much time and effort you spend in finding those quotes.
I had just enough time to have my voice back for this show
Sure.
from the Cubs games in Chicago. I
Oh,
have to
yeah.
tell you, I spent a good week so completely hoarse that every time I'd answer the phone, people would go, "I can't hear you," and I'm like, "I can't talk any louder."
Just to touch on that, so
Yes.
you know, Baro, Rob and I were in Chicago for the NAR YPN Advance
Okay.
meeting last week, and Josh, tagged along with us.
The kids needed to go to
Good.
Cubs games.
Right.
What were we
Kids did
supposed
need
to
to go
do?
to a Cubs game.
Yeah.
And they needed to be entertained. Somebody had to do it. It's
Yeah, somebody
tough
had to.
job, but
It was really rough. I had a hard job. All right. So so we're talking about global real estate. Baro, that's why we invited you here.
Well, thank you.
mean, obviously you're real big on teaching a lot of classes
Mhm.
on. Well, for one, I just recently took your
At Home with Diversity.
At Home with Diversity class. That was an excellent class. We've been really promoting.
Mhm.
We've been promoting that for the last year. We've been promoting the Fairhaven simulation at NAR. Do you want to talk a little bit about what being a global ambassador is? What does that bring to us?
Yes. So there are a number of things over there. NAR is affiliated with about 79 different countries and about 100 and some different associations. And so with that bilateral partnership, primarily it's been that they want to learn more from NAR, because as you know, NAR has been around for over 100 years.
Right.
And has done a lot in private property rights. So, for example, when I was there, what at that time they used to call a liaison, now they call them an ambassador, to India, they don't have licensing per se. Anybody can sell real estate.
Mhm.
And
See, that's I think that's something that has to be touched on. Is I don't know that everybody realizes how actual sale of private property and real property goes in different countries
Yes.
around
Yes.
the world.
Right.
It's not the same.
No,
Yeah.
and so because of the fact that anybody can and that there's no organization, no MLS, etc., you could go buy a property and there'd be 4 different signs because the seller had talked to 4 different people who all felt they could sell it, so they all put up their signs, and it's who brings the buyer is the one who gets the commission. So they want to talk about, well, how do you get licensing? Why is it important? How does it help the consumer to actually have licensed professionals? How to set up an MLS? And so that's what we would help them with is here is the process. Here's how you get licensing, getting them to connect with Arella, which handles licensing and education, etc., providing them with courses. So we took all of the CIPS courses there. We just the idea of referrals, because nobody ever gave referrals out there.
Mhm.
And so I would point out to them that especially globally, so like to the US, practically every Indian has an uncle or aunt who's in the US or coming to the US or something, that if they referred them to a realtor and they got a referral fee, because of the difference in their commission rates and ours, the referral fee sometimes would be more than what they would make on a full commission
Oh, wow.
back
Oh,
home.
wow.
So, and they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And so, telling them that's why they need to engage. And now what's happened is in some parts of India, they have developed an MLS and they're slowly working on getting licensing together. what's been interesting is there are developers who have now said, okay, we're willing to work only with people who are a member of the National Association of Realtors of India,
Oh, wow.
but they're still not willing to do exclusive listings.
Mm.
So they're still talking to
Multiple
4 or 5
sides.
people,
Mhm.
but it's heading in that direction. So that's sort of what we do. On the flip side, and I guess since this is on everybody's mind, I can mention it like right now with what's happening in Ukraine. The realtors have jumped in a big way, not only from the US, but it was the Real Estate Association of Ukraine that started doing a lot to helping displaced people, finding them shelters, helping them move. Then all of the neighboring countries, Romania, Poland, etc., all of their realtors jumped in, and we're even going to Ukraine to help people get out of the country. So that bond that's developed, that family that you have amongst realtors, really has connected. So that's sort of where I see a lot of the benefit. And then there's, getting business from it, because let's face it, none of us are here purely to volunteer. We all volunteer, but we also like to see something come out of it. And so, for example, this year, as Rob mentioned earlier, I'm chair of NAR's global committee. It's called the Global Business Alliances. And so we're doing 5 webinars with each of the top foreign countries that invest in U.S. residential. So that was Canada, Mexico, the UK, China, and India. And we have them present on how to network with their brokers. How is business done? How to connect? Because those are the countries that have a lot of people coming here. So to know how to interact with them, understanding a little bit of the culture, understanding a bit about just how to do business, how to focus in working with them. And there's some very interesting things that come out of that. For example, with Canadians, we found out they tend to travel north-south. They don't go east-west.
Okay.
So, for example, from New Mexico, if you're looking to make connections with Canadian realtors in order to be able to get business, look at which states are north of us. Don't go to the
Don't go
eastern
to Quebec,
states
huh?
because they're
Right.
not going to come here. They will all go down to Florida.
Interesting.
So it's that sort of thing. Whereas, here in the U.S., we go every which way.
Right.
And so it's those, it's like, oh, I didn't know that, so I really shouldn't focus my attention on Halifax or something because they're really not coming in this direction.
I wonder why that is. It has to be like a seasonal thing or something like that,
I think
right?
between seasonal and flights and it being most convenient, and maybe in some ways culturally, there are more similarities along the East Coast, along the West Coast, etc. So it's interesting. And the same thing, the West Coasters will even go beyond the U.S. and end up in Mexico. A lot of
Wow.
them. So, it's just little tidbits like that one finds out that's kind of interesting.
It's funny that you talked about culture. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot moving into this show. As a property manager, I have a lot of university properties, and I rent a lot to foreign students.
Foreign exchange.
Well, not even exchanges. People here on fellowship. People, I met a guy the other day who is a accomplished architect from India that is coming to basically benefit our university. It's not. He's not coming to he's coming to teach us something,
Right.
which is something that, and of course he comes in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He doesn't look like he's
Anything,
and
yeah.
well, he's like,
Yeah, he doesn't
it's,
come
it's
off as the
incredible,
professional
but
that we expect,
talking
but
to him
yeah.
a little bit, just talking to him a little bit, he was like, he spoke cleaner English than I ever will, and a young man, but super professional. But then there's also an interesting thing where appointments don't really exist. And I don't know, that's something, or at least that's something where I tend to structure my day where it's I have this time I have to be there. You know, I try as hard as I can to be early. I don't want to be late because of somebody else's time. But a lot of times with a lot of my foreign
Clients.
you know, tenants,
Mhm.
it'll be something where I'll make an appointment and then I'll get there and I'll call and they'll be like, oh, we'll be there soon. And it's like, well, have you haven't left yet? And they were like, well, we're waiting for you to get there. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I'm here, you know, like.
Definitely
Yeah.
noticed
Yes,
that.
it's very interesting, and I'm sure you remember when we were doing the At Home with Diversity,
Yeah.
that there's the high context countries and the low context countries, and the U.S., Canada, England, Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Western Europe fall into low context, you know, where appointments, timing is very important. The rest of the world, which is actually the majority, especially when you look at India and China, I mean, they account for almost a third of the world's population, if not more. It's a much more laid back way of doing
Mhm.
things. Time isn't quite as important. And also, I know from when I was serving as the NAR's ambassador to India, travel time is a big issue. So sometimes just within Delhi to get from one side to another can take a few hours.
Mhm.
So as a result, depending on what's happening in the traffic, again, the cultural issues, it just amazed me. And I've seen things have improved here in New Mexico, but I remember when I first came here, and hate to get into this topic, but I would often see roadkill on the road.
Mhm.
In India, despite the humongous traffic based on their population and the fact that within the cities, you can have a cow just come wandering down and it will sit down in the middle of the road, in the middle of the traffic.
Mhm.
Nobody ever harms it.
Mhm.
The traffic goes around it. It
Mhm.
stops. A dog can come hang out and, you know, you'll see a stray dog feeding its babies right in the middle of the road. But people are so conscious of that. But as a result, traffic also is jammed. And so it's much slower. And making appointments, I remember one time when I was going, the association is in a suburb of Delhi called Gurgaon. And so I had told them that I was going to be staying at a hotel in Delhi. And they said, no, you don't want to do that. You'll never get here on time for any appointment. You need to stay in Gurgaon itself, and hopefully you'll be on time. So, yes, a very different mindset, a very different way of doing things.
Well, and what's amazing to me about that is also the idea that they don't get necessarily like angry about having to wait.
For a dog to feed its babies.
Right,
or-
could you imagine,
Yeah.
like, in America, that would happen, and you'd have people honking, and there'd be a line of people,
Yes.
and they'd be cussing from the
And
back.
they do
then,
honk a
you
lot,
know,
but
right.
usually at each other more so than at the animals.
Right, which
Um,
is funny. Yesterday I was driving and I was driving up Cole and I almost hit the car in front of me because they slammed on their brakes and I was like, "What are you doing?" And of course I'm like yelling in my car, and it turned out there was a squirrel that had probably gotten hit because its back legs didn't work, but it was hobbling across the street and this car slammed on its brakes, so let it go. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh, okay."
You felt bad?
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh."
But I think,
Good job,
but that's the
car.
thing, that it's such a difference in culture, though, you know, and I think it really is
Yes.
something that would benefit us to recognize, and we don't really.
I would say for our audience, get the book Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. It's really worth it. It goes through at least 100 different countries and how they interact, how do they do business. Even things like what kind of gifts do you give? Should you give gifts? Should you not? What color wrapping paper to use? Because those things make a difference. In a lot of the Far Eastern countries, the idea of numerology
Oh.
has a big impact. So the number, sometimes, and you'll find this, that you might be showing a client a house, and they may actually like the house, but they won't buy it because the dress doesn't come to a good number.
Wow.
So those sort of things make a huge difference. And so if y'all are working with international clients, I would strongly recommend getting that book and reading it. It is,
Good.
not only is it fun reading, but you learn so much.
I bet. Kiss, bow, or shake hands.
Good
And
today.
I'll order it.
yes, and I had a funny story on something like that. When I was still in college, my major had been doing business in Japan because at that time it seemed like everything was going towards Japan. And
This was before real estate?
oh yes,
For you-
this is when I
okay.
was still in college,
Gotcha.
getting my master's. And the parents of a friend of mine were going to be going to Japan that summer. So they'd invited me over because they knew that's what I was specializing in, was doing business in Japan, and want to know about how they should behave and what they should do. And, you know, they didn't want to be the ugly American. And so I was telling them all about things. I said, now, once you get there, one of the big things will be they will invite you to go to a spa, because that's very big in Japan, the hot tubs and things. And I said, over there, the norm is everybody, men and women, just go in their birthday suits. So be aware of that. And they said, fine, and you know, those sort of things. And so they left. And so when they came back, I asked if we could meet up for dinner and chat a bit about how it was and things. And they said, well, everything went really smoothly, and we really appreciated everything you said, except for that hot tub thing. And I'm like, what happened? And they said, well, we got there, and based on what you had said, and we saw a lot of other people who were there were going in their birthday suits, you know, the men and women. They said, so that's what we did. But for our tub, our host and hostess had studied up on American customs,
Oh.
so they were wearing bathing suits.
That's
So
funny.
you know, so sometimes things like that happen, wires get crossed,
Mhm.
but it's still good to know, or maybe to talk to them and say, okay, it's just like nowadays, you can hardly ever invite somebody over for dinner to your home without asking if they have dietary restrictions.
Oh, right.
Mhm.
You know,
Right.
and so it's the same sort of thing, always touching base and making sure everything's fine. I'll give you one other example, and then I'll let you all get back to your questions, because I don't want to sidetrack us.
Oh, that's totally
Um,
done. We
This
can
is
go off
great.
script as much as we
But I had some clients from the Philippines, and it was the parents and 6 children, plus they bred German Shepherd dogs. So they wanted a property that would be somewhat remote, where they could have kennels and things like that. So, but they also wanted a place that was large enough that they could have rooms for all 6 kids and things. And we looked, and it was really challenging, because the average house in Santa Fe is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath.
Mhm.
Right.
And so finally, we found one that was on 5 acres. It was the last property in the subdivision, so on the other side was open space, and I think it had 5 bedrooms. So they said they could make that work. So everything's going well. We had gone for a second showing. I'm in the house talking with the wife and the kids. The husband goes outside just to walk around the property. And he comes back and he's kind of shaking his head. And I'm like, oh, that's not a good sign.
Mhm.
And he's like, there are railroad tracks on the other side of the property. And I'm like, yeah, I said, but there's only one train that runs on that track, and so it only goes by twice in a day. He said, no, it's bad luck, because when a train goes by, it takes your luck away. And so I, you know, wanting to sell the property after all this time of showing them houses, turned around and said, but it doesn't matter, it will bring your luck back when it comes back. And he kind of looked at me and he says,
Don't be clever.
no, it doesn't work that way. And so that was one of the things that I have learned as I've been going through, is if somebody says something, take it at first value.
Mhm.
Don't try and override it, because it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
And As it turned out, we looked for another couple of months and couldn't find anything else, so they ended up not buying here,
Wow.
just for that reason.
Wow.
So,
Isn't it crazy how that is? When I first got into property management and I first was doing real estate, I had this one house that I was trying to have rented. That it was a very interesting floor plan. It probably had been a church or something
Mhm.
at some point. It didn't necessarily have the typical like setup of like a couple bedrooms with a kid. It was like there was like a back little like pocket kitchen and a bunch of different rooms. But what was real weird about it was there was like murals and these like religious paintings everywhere. And even to the point where there was like little statues and stuff that kind of like it was very interesting going through there. And my first thoughts were, I'm never going to rent this house. Like, how am I going to find that person that is going to want all of this, you know? And I literally like had it for less than 24 hours. I met a lady who was Puerto Rican, New York transfer, and her grandmother was some kind of curandera, and all of the paintings and everything were completely like right in, like she
Right.
recognized everything. And it was like I went home and I told Heather, I was like, my mind is blown. I'm like, I completely had like the most negative. I had this idea that just
no
because,
way.
and
Yes.
that was my cultural block, is what it was I didn't see the beauty in
Yeah.
it, or I didn't see the benefit in it at all. I thought it was more of something that was going to
Yes.
hold me back, and it turned out to not hold me back at all.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to not prejudge.
Right.
And that's really the key thing when you're working with anyone. I mean, even within our own culture, you know, if you look at somebody from New England compared to somebody from California, or somebody from Florida or Texas compared to New Mexico, there's still enough differences in our values and things that if you go in with judgment, it could become an issue. So always stay open-minded. And I know when I was first starting to teach at home with diversity, a number of times I'd have people in the class say, well, you know, if they're wanting to come and buy here in the US, they need to adapt to how we do things. And I said, well, there's a fine line here. Yes, they have to follow our laws and the process that we use for real estate. But remember, if you're wanting a sale, you need to accommodate them.
Right.
And so, you know, keep the two things in a good balance. You can't just say, oh no, they have to become like us, because that's really not what America's about.
Right.
Well, right. It's about learning and becoming
Yes.
closer together.
And
I-
accepting everyone. And
I made a
So-
mistake one day there was a husband and wife I was showing a house to, right? And I don't usually like ask questions of, you know, what is your religion? What is your, you know, that's not something it shouldn't be important to me, right? It isn't important to me. I really, it isn't. But it's something where if I would have known, maybe had some clue of what their culture was, maybe I would have acted a little bit different. And it was a situation where I kept addressing the wife, and I kept asking her questions, and because I thought that because you know, a lot of times I'm selling the wife more than I'm selling the
Yes.
husband.
Yes.
And so I was on that mode, and finally at the end, the husband pulled me aside and goes, please don't address my wife any longer. If you need to speak to anyone, you speak to me. She will only speak to me as well. And I just, okay, you know, like my wife would
Yes.
have, you know, I'd be decapitated in my sleep.
That's
That
right.
was my, you know, but
Yeah.
you know, that was the thing. And we ended up, you know, they're great tenants. I ended up renting home to them. They keep it beautifully, and they're very good renters. But it was a thing where it didn't even occur that I should have
Yes.
acted a
Yes.
certain way. And I'm glad that I didn't defend him. He was upfront enough to address me and
Right,
and
right.
educate me, which was beneficial to me there too.
Yeah, and it's the same thing you'll find with a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, that if the parents are along, always address the parents.
Right.
Even if
it's the kid that's
yes,
renting
who's
it,
going,
yeah.
who's going to be renting or buying or whatever, you still always want to show the respect for the elders. It's huge.
Right.
So yeah, there are a lot of fun little things that
Oh, and
one
I've had that
learns.
one. There's lots of times that the parents come along.
Yes,
They
yes.
love to come along. Awesome.
Well, how many languages do you speak?
So that's an interesting question. I spoke more when I first came than I do now because I just, in New Mexico, you really don't get to practice a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So obviously English,
Mhm.
then Persian, because that's my mother tongue, even
Mm.
though I'm much better at English than I am at Persian, because it's been like 40 years since I left. So, but I do still speak it, and Russian. And then I've studied Spanish, French, and Arabic. Now, am I fluent in them? No,
Right.
but if I go at least to a Spanish-speaking country or a French-speaking country, after a little bit, it starts coming back to me.
And you can
Mm.
get by.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arabic, no. I understand some words, and part of it is when you're studying Arabic, and I took it for 4 semesters, their written language is very different from the spoken language.
Mhm.
Classical Arabic is in a whole league of its own compared to your day-to-day colloquial speak. And we were just studying reading and writing,
Mm.
so not conversation.
Mm. Wow.
So I never really got to pick it up.
Mm. So, that being said, is it helpful to, or rather, is it a necessity to like know the language if you're gonna want to strive to be an ambassador?
No. As a matter of fact, they don't, because almost anywhere, I won't say everywhere, but almost everywhere, there will be people who speak English.
Mhm.
So that helps. Now, I know for 1 year, at that time Random,
Mhm.
was the Ambassador Association to Korea. And so we set up to meet with them at one of the NAR functions, only to find out that none of them spoke English. And none of us spoke Korean. And we're like, okay, hi. And that's as far as we could get.
Oh, wow.
So the next time we made sure we had an interpreter with us.
Mhm.
But that's another thing one can do, is always get somebody who can speak the language to
Yeah,
be
I'm
there
sure
to help.
obviously it helps, but
Yeah.
that's I think good for our listeners too to know that like
Yes.
if they wanted to be go through the SIPs, right, and then be
CIPS.
Yeah.
So you brought up a good point there with the SIPs thing.
Mm-hmm.
NAR in general likes all initials to be pronounced as they are, so it's ABR,
Oh, okay.
NAR, CIPS.
Interesting, I didn't know that. Okay.
They don't like it being called NAR. They don't like it being called SIPs. Any of those things, and that's why I still go NMAR instead of NAMAR. It's SFAR. Okay, we won't talk about GAR.
Our own thing.
Yes, you'll have your own thing going. Like to use your own way of doing everything, so that's fine. But yeah, NAR with its all of its affiliations,
Acronyms,
they
yeah,
like
okay.
to have the initials actually used.
Good to
And
know.
mainly, again, it's because of the global.
Mm.
SIPs in certain languages in Eastern Europe refers to some anatomical part of women.
Okay.
Oh.
And so they don't like using
Okay.
that.
Yeah,
That
so
would make
using
sense.
letters, okay.
And it was the same thing,
Distinguishes,
like, for
okay.
example, with NAR, and then NAR India became Nari.
Mm.
But in Hindi, Nar refers to the masculine, Nari refers to feminine.
Huh.
And
Mm.
so they felt that they were being slighted
Ah.
by being referred to only in the feminine.
Mm.
So it's NAR India, NAR, etc.
Interesting.
So
Huh.
just
So if somebody
little
wanted to
things.
become like an international realtor or a global ambassador, how would they go about doing that?
Well, there's a new initiative, right?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. For getting involved in global real estate,
Mhm.
some of the things to do is taking the CIPS courses, and there are now 6 modules, so it's a 6-day
Mhm.
program, at home with diversity, and then starting to make contacts. The thing that I have found in the many years I've been involved with international and global, and even at one point, and I'm going to keep saying NMAR instead of random NMAR because, you know, we had that name change, but I'm treating it as one. So NMAR did have a international committee and things, but it never took off the ground because most of the people who joined came with the idea that if they attended a couple of meetings, they were going to get clients. And it's not like that. It's like if you're prospecting in any way for real estate, it takes time. You have to get out there and market. You have to get to know people. And it's the same thing here. So if you're wanting to get involved in global, you can do it both by contacting and networking with people, with other brokers overseas. You can also do it locally. So for example, in Santa Fe, we have a Greek association. There's a Japanese association. It's getting involved with them. Checking with places like the universities. How many international students are coming in? Where are they coming in? Talk to the personnel. See if they can help you connect with them. So with the universities, you'll get both rentals and sales because there are people who, I've had some friends, for example, from Hungary, who bought a house by the university area, 3-bedroom. The son was in 1 bedroom, they rented out the other 2. Basically, the rent from the other 2 covered the mortgage. The son was there as quote unquote property manager, sorry. So he was making sure everything was okay. And so by the time he finished college and then decided to go to UNM Law School, so that was 7 years, and they had this on a 15-year mortgage, and the appreciation, they did really, really well when they sold it. So you do see that, and that's something to talk to them also when they're looking to buy or rent, that here's why you might want to consider it. But beyond that, hospitals, especially now, are bringing in a lot of doctors and nurses from Indian places. The labs are bringing in tons of foreigners. So again, being in touch with all of that, for example, right now, Los Alamos is planning to bring in 2,000 people.
Wow.
There is absolutely no housing
I
in
was
Los
gonna
Alamos.
That's
say.
my stepmother
Yeah, where they
is
going?
a nuclear engineer, and they basically cherry picked her out of the place
Yeah.
where she was working
Yeah,
to go to
yeah.
Los Alamos.
They sell
And
in
she's
Santa Fe.
when I talked to her, she was looking at either Rio Rancho or Santa Fe because there's nothing in Los Alamos.
Nothing,
Yeah,
absolutely nothing.
Did the same.
Yeah.
Very much.
I remember about 5 years ago, I had a client looking in Los Alamos. There were 4 houses. And I'm like, hey, this isn't going to work.
Literally.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not a secret anymore.
Yes.
Build more houses, guys. You know.
So yes. And then you asked about getting involved in the volunteer side, being a global ambassador.
Right.
So again, NAR will look at what your background is in the sense of, do you have your CIPS? As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure they usually expect you to have that.
Right.
And then, have you had international background? Did you live someplace? It doesn't have to be in that country, but have you lived overseas? Have you worked overseas? Anything of that nature to show some connection. But again, not always. And they just want to make sure that you're sensitive to working with other cultures.
Right.
And then they kind of go from there
Okay.
in picking who.
Great.
We had offered the CAPS here at GAR a couple years ago. I think it
Yes,
might be coming back.
2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had thought of bringing it the end of this year. It might be early next year. We're going to see.
I know there was a survey that went out not too
Yes.
long ago about
Yes.
anybody that was interested in being on a type of global.
Yes, because
committee.
we're trying to resurrect the one that was at NMAR and see if we can't get that going again.
Okay, that international committee.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
I'd love to learn more. So I put my name in there, but that's just
Right.
because that's how I like to be.
Yes.
I'm always trying to
Get more. Yeah.
information.
Yeah, and that was always my thing, is learn as much as you can. Keep
Right.
taking courses,
Yeah.
designations, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a big thing. We talked about throughout, you know, the conversation here, we've talked a lot about differences in culture. That's a big thing that NAR is pushing this year, right? The DEI
Yes.
is what they're calling it, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
We're in the process of, there's a few very caring individuals here at GAR that are working really hard to create a new committee. I think we've gotten some really good feedback and some good traction so far. I joined up with them.
You're
because,
both on that committee, correct?
Yeah.
It was we went to the first meeting, and it was really like pretty great, and they had a good meeting. It was they're doing some big things. But what advice would you have as far as, you know, starting that off, and where do we go from here?
Good question.
So, for one, definitely to go online and do the Fairhaven.
Yeah.
It is amazing.
Man,
I
I can
think
speak
it's
for
one of
that.
the best online courses I have ever taken. Because even with all that I've done, and I teach all of this, I'd be doing something and would say, nah, no, not
See,
that way.
That's what I thought too.
And
I was like, I totally have the right answer, and then I'm like, what?
Yes. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
You know, and the good thing is it then lets you go back and redo it so you can see where you may have made a mistake or what needs to happen. So it's amazing. They also are now teaching an implicit bias course, which is very good because it deals with the biases we have and maybe don't know we have.
Mhm.
And we all have them.
Yeah.
That's human nature. So one of the things they want to bring out is don't be embarrassed the fact that you are biased, because we all are in some way or another. The issue is how to get past it, how to know what your bias is and keep it in check. So so that's another really good course to get into. My only concern, and this may not be too popular overall, and I'm sorry that this is going on air, but
Yeah.
is not to go overboard. Because, you know, like in physics, they say for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In life, it's for every action, there's twice the reaction.
Right.
And so one has to be very careful. There's a really good book written by a professor named Amy Chua, Chaou, or something close to that.
Okay.
And I think it's called either Tribal Politics or Political Tribes. It's one of those two, but one can Google it and it will come up. And she talks about how certain actions, and we can see that here in the US, has then brought a pushback. And what that pushback is. And the more you go in certain directions, the more pushback you'll get from the other side. So one has to be really sensitive with doing the DEI as to how far one goes or what are the topics one makes a big issue of, because there will be those who are then saying, wait a second, why do I have to? So here's a really good example. I do a lot of gardening, and so I had joined the Santa Fe Rose Society.
Nice. My grandmother was the president of the Albuquerque Rose Society.
There you go. See, and I didn't know her though.
Years and years ago.
And
That's so funny.
so we were doing a exhibition, and everybody had brought their roses, you know, to be judged and all of that. And there was a woman who came, and then she's sitting by the door. And, you know, people are saying, well, why don't you come in, you know, part of the society and things. Just, oh, I don't like the smell of roses. So then you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, okay, if you don't like the smell of roses, why are you in the Rose Society? But at the same time, she has the right to be where she wants. And so how do you balance those? And now who's the one having to make the adaptation? Is it everybody in the Rose Society? So now we're only bringing photos of our roses instead of the actual rose and are judging it based on photos because there's somebody in the group who doesn't like the smell of roses. So, you know, how do you balance those things? The same thing, you know, with, if you notice nowadays women don't wear perfume that frequently, men don't wear colognes because they're people who are sensitive to that. But whose right gets trampled on or whose right is of more value? The one who wants to wear the cologne or the one who doesn't like the cologne? So I'm not saying that one or the other is right. I'm just saying we need to be aware of those things.
Right.
And how do we handle it so that eventually there isn't this floodgate that opens that kind of washes everything away.
Right.
So it's important to be sensitive, but not make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's just knowing when it's a molehill. Which sometimes, kind of Josh brought this up earlier about not seeing the forest for the trees. We do that sometimes, or is it the other way around, that we don't see the trees for the forest? But is we get on a certain topic and then we don't see everything else around it. Yes, but there were one or two other things that I had wanted to bring up that you all had mentioned. One was about motivating buyers in the current market who don't want to purchase a house because of the high interest rates. And so I did this little thing after I saw that. So back in 1980, before you all were born,
That was when I was born.
okay. my family bought a house in Santa Fe. It was $150,000, but the interest rate was 18%. So the monthly payments, and we're talking just about principal and interest, on a 30-year fixed, was $2,261. Today, if you look at a $350,000 house, because prices have all gone up, at 6%, it's at $2,098. So it's still less expensive than what that $150,000 house had been in 1980.
Wow.
So I kind of point that out to them, that don't just look at what the interest rate is and say, oh my God, it went up from 2%. We have been able to manage and survive through these. In addition, when I think about it, back in 1980, now I'm kind of dating myself, is when I started my first job. After having got my master's, and which was in international law and international business, so it wasn't like I just went and learned basket weaving or something. Not that there's anything against basket weaving, but my first job I was making $28,000. Now when I talk to my friends' kids who are getting their masters and going on, they're usually starting someplace between 70 and 120,000. So it's really not that bad. It's just we've lost perspective because we had interest rates so low. And so I kind of bring that up to them and say, let's kind of look at the reality of things, what percentage of your budget it is. The place where it is an issue is for first-time home buyers.
Right.
Because the prices have gone up to an extent that you cannot find anything.
Right.
So I know the year I was president of the Santa Fe Association, which was back in 2008, we were doing affordable housing, and we need to do something about it. And for Santa Fe, 250,000 is the cutoff. So if it's up to 250,000, it's considered affordable. I looked in our MLS, we had one listing at 250.
Wow.
Just one. So what do you do? Where do you go for your first responders, your teachers, your nurses? All
That's
of
what
those
we
people.
talk about. Yeah.
And that's another big issue, is how do you do this? How do you deal with this? And it's such a complex question, like now they're talking about, building a whole bunch of more apartments. And that's great, but then make sure that 5 years from now, those apartments can't be converted into condos and go on the sales market, because then the prices go up. So, I mean, I know back in like 2004, 2005, when the market was just booming, I think practically every single apartment complex in Santa Fe got converted into condos
Really? Wow.
because there was so much more money in it.
Yeah.
And so, those become issues also. And then you get into this whole thing about, but that is our system. Money talks. And if you say, no, we have to be concerned about all these other people, then that kind of verges on socialism, and you know how that goes over. So it's a really hard issue as to how one deals with all of these sort of things. Another thought I'd had when I was coming down and things was about when I started in real estate, which was in '92, and what do I wish I had known back then, and what I would recommend to people in the YPN group who are younger, starting out in real estate, is as soon as you can, start investing in real estate. Start buying as many investment properties as you can.
Heard that a lot.
Yes, it
Even if
really
you think
makes a
you're at
huge
the top of the
difference.
market.
Yes. Well, okay, but the market will come down.
Right.
But start saving now for that.
Yeah.
And for those of you with young kids, well, unfortunately, are already out of that category, I hate to say. But usually the recommendation is when your kid is about 2 or so, buy an investment property on a 15-year mortgage and rent it out. That hopefully will cover your mortgage, the rent. That's what you have to make sure of, is that the rent will cover. You will have to spend a little towards maintenance, things like that.
Right.
And we have a property manager here who'll tell you all about how that will work. But then in 15 years, when it's paid off, and your child is now 17 or 18, just starting to go to college, you can sell that property, and hopefully that should be enough to cover their college expenses. So again, one of those things, to think about investing way back earlier, not saying, oh my God, I'll just wait till, I'm a little more comfortable because I still need to do this and I need to do that. And, tighten the belt when you're younger, and things will be much easier as you get older.
Absolutely. And I 1,000% agree. And you talk about putting things into perspective about rates and incomes and all that. Sometimes what I'll talk to first-time home buyers and putting it into perspective of, even if you bought at the height of the market using the 2008 crisis as an example, right? Looking at the charts, statistically, it went down, right? Even if you bought up here, it went back up.
Yes.
And eventually, you'll probably, if not break even, then whenever you're ready to sell, the important thing too is, right, like being able to make that payment and being able to wait out the market to sell at a profit. It'll eventually go up.
And two other things that I point out, and since we don't have any stockbrokers here, I can say this, is that stocks, which a lot of people look at stocks, also go up and down.
Right.
But the difference is with the house that you've got, even if it comes down a bit, you've had all those years of shelter. You've had all those years of enjoyment of having your own property, where you don't have a landlord saying, oh, you can't paint that room, or you can't plant such and such a tree, or whatever it might be. With stocks, you never get that enjoyment of saying, oh yeah, look, I'm sitting inside my stock. Isn't it lovely?
Right.
So, again, looking at those comparisons, in my opinion, real estate is still the better investment.
Absolutely.
So that's another thing I tend to talk a lot to my clients about. So if you weren't buying real estate, what were you going to do? And invariably they're saying, well, we put our money in stocks or bonds or wherever they're putting it. And then we walk through that. And I tell them, I'm not a financial advisor. So, after we've talked about this and you've got some ideas, then go talk to your financial advisor. Who hopefully isn't also your stockbroker, and get some feedback.
Right.
So those are a couple of things I would strongly recommend for younger people as they're starting out in real estate, to look long term.
And be a student of history.
Yes.
That's the way to go.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm glad you took some time to look over some of our committee's questions and had some highlights there. And as much as I want to get through every single one, I don't know if we have the time for it.
Yes.
But,
No, I understand.
yeah. If you wanted to maybe summarize some other things about the global realtor and everything, some things we touched on earlier, or any other highlights you want to
Yes.
add?
So the key thing is just to keep in mind the world is becoming a smaller place. People are moving everywhere. And not only do we need to look at all of our clients who are coming here from other countries, there are a lot of people moving out of the U.S. to other countries, whether it's because of jobs or just because they want to live someplace else or whatever. being able to connect them to someone, and because we do have these bilateral agreements, then you as a realtor can also get referral fees coming in the other direction. So keeping that in mind, that every single day, regardless of all the issues that are going on, the world is still becoming a smaller place. And people are moving back and forth, and other countries are becoming more mobile. You know, for a while, the U.S. was one of the most mobile countries, but now it's becoming everywhere. I see this in India, where young people are actually leaving their families and moving from one state to another. In the past, that would never happen. You just stayed where you were, and people lived in the same family home for generations. That those things are all changing, and the number of people. Just a quick thing. 2 weeks ago, I had a little dinner party at my house for my sister and brother-in-law and things, and some friends of my brother who lives in Washington, D.C., were visiting Santa Fe. So I invited them to come join us since they were in Santa Fe, and they're both from China. Still Chinese citizens, but living and working here. And so I asked them, I said, you all have siblings, anything? And they said, no, we're both only children. And I'm like, and your parents, where are they? And they said, well, they're in China. I said, are you all thinking of going back? You know, because they'd come here for college and things and finished and then got jobs. I said, are you all thinking of going back? And they said, no. I said, are your parents thinking of moving here? They said, no. I said, so how is that going to work when they get older? You know, and they said, well, they have support systems there, you know, they have their friends, there's a nephew or a niece or somebody, and hopefully they won't come to the U.S., so they'll be there to help. But there is that mobility, those days of where it was the child's responsibility to stay there and take care of their parents. Apparently now parents are saying, no, we would like you to have the best, so go where it works for you. So, you know, there's a lot of that sort of stuff happening. And so I think global real estate is really kind of a great niche to get into to help augment what you're doing just locally.
Awesome. I think that's a good little wrap up. The world is getting smaller.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Baro,
My
for
pleasure.
joining us. It was a wonderful hour speaking with you. I'm sure that we
Likewise.
could have, you know, kept talking all day.
Yes.
And obviously your wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much for
My pleasure,
joining
and thank
us.
you for having me.
Yes, absolutely.
What do we have coming up at GAR that we need to talk about? The coffee meetup is at Cafe Bella. In Rio Rancho. It's at 2115 Golf Course Road Southeast. We also have, let's see what's going on at GAR board elections. There's a survey out right now, so if you are interested in joining the board or being elected for any position, get on there. Battle of the Bands is coming up, right? When is that? That's in.
It is August 20. Wait, no, that's auditions. August 21st is auditions if you haven't already gotten on.
But Battle of the Bands, all the proceeds go directly to the Realtor Fund, so that's a big one that we want to promote. And then the Inmar Housing NMAR Housing Summit is in September, as well as there's something else coming up. The Casino Night. How can I forget Casino Night to benefit
That
our
Friday.
pack?
Yeah,
Yep.
the Friday after the NMAR conference.
Yep. And that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some gambling. I'm going to dress up like James Bond. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Excited for the bingo.
Not like Frank Sinatra?
We'll see what I can find. I
Don't
would
have
love
too
to.
many ideas, 'cause then I have to match it.
Oh, you like it.
Yeah, you can go as Nancy Sinatra.
There you go.
The blonde
Boots
wig,
and everything.
the
You'll be great.
boots, You know.
Excellent.
All right,
Awesome.
great.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys at the coffee meetup.
Yes.
See you there.
Thank you.
Thank